If you're someone that starts out building in multiple markets, go get laser focused on one, maybe two markets, and go hit it as hard as you can and watch what will happen. If you're doing your market research and your market analysis properly, you don't need to diversify.
So the two biggest takeaways are that real estate is risk-free and passive.
That's right. That's right. You just put some money in as a down payment and you're guaranteed to collect rents for the next 30 years.
Today, I'm thrilled to introduce Michael Albaum, an engineer by day and one of my longtime favorite real estate investors and educators by night. This interview was extra special to me as Michael was actually my very first ever real estate investing coach back in 2021. I even get to tell him how much that experience meant to me live on air, so stay tuned for that live reaction. From his highest highs to his most difficult trials, Michael is an open book in this interview, sharing lots of wisdom and tactics for investors of all levels. Hope you enjoy. Today, I'm very excited to host Mr. Michael Albaum. Michael, I'm very familiar with your story, but I would love for you to just give a quick intro to my audience here in your own words.
Totally. So I started with real estate investing like probably so many of your listeners. I did all the things my parents told me to do. I went to school, got good grades, got a good job. And then as soon as I got that first paycheck at that good job, I was like, oh, this is not going to get me where I want to go fast enough. And I was living in the Bay Area, California, high cost living area. And so I got a hold of that little purple covered book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And from that very first time I read it, just made sense to me. Real estate investing totally clicked from just a pure financial and mathematical perspective because I was an engineer. So numbers just made sense to me. It was like a second language. And so I spent about 2 years getting self-educated, consuming as much material as I could. It was a bit frustrating because at the time, like I wasn't so aware of podcasts and Bigger Pockets really wasn't a thing at that time. So I was just piecing together whatever I could until I eventually bought this first deal. And when that first rent check showed up, I was like, I'm a genius. I figured out the key to life, which of course we all know people have been doing this for a long time. But it just totally set off this fire in me of that I could totally disconnect my income from my job. And it was no longer a function of, okay, how hard did I work or how many hours did I spend at work? It was like, no, I did the math, I did the research. So now this thing is going to pay me day in and day out for the work that I did one time. And again, just as a concept, I was like totally hooked.
You read the book, but you didn't quite stumble into Bigger Pockets and communities and coaching and all that stuff. When was this when you had your first property?
So 2013, 2014 is when I purchased that first one. And I said, if I can do this once a year for 10 years, that'll be great because 10 sounded like a good number of properties to have. And it's funny how so many of us, when we get our start, we have these blinders or this is our purview. And then the further along in the space, we get access and introduced to other concepts and other ways of growing and scaling. And so lasted for about 3 years. And then I blew past that goal. I was like, oh, there's way more to be done here.
Yeah. One of the themes that comes up often on this show and also people that I've worked with to help get started is when they think about the first deal, it feels too small to them. And the idea of buying a property is big. But then when they say, hey, I put all this tens of thousands of dollars into something and I'm only getting $100, $150 a month in net profit, like how can I string this together toward financial freedom, right? And it's like you said, over the years, as time does its trick and as your goals and your skills evolve, then it becomes more clear. But I think for investors at the very beginning of their journey, it's really hard to visualize, 10 years ahead, what things could look like.
Absolutely. And interesting too, because I started young. And so an extra $200 a month, an extra $250 a month was really impactful to my life, just everyday living. I was like, holy crap, that's like a portion of my paycheck that I'm earning every 2 weeks. And so as we get older and as we start earning, our income potential starts going up in our W-2 or corporate life, that $200 becomes less and less impactful. And so can seem might not be worth the effort. So it's almost the younger you start, the easier it is because it feels more impactful.
So you were working full-time as an engineer in the Bay Area, which is very expensive. Mm-hmm. And sorry, remind me, your first rental was in California or was it long distance?
Yeah, I was in California in a market like 3 hours south of where I grew up, which at this point in time was like an 8-hour drive from where I was living.
Got it. Because I just happen to know your background. Your thesis shifted and out of state or long distance investing became your core strategy.
Yes.
At what point did you come to that understanding or realization and shift out of state?
Yeah, so it was in year 2, year 3 after that first investment. And so I bought a second property in that same market in Southern California because, again, my goal was one a year for 10 years. And so I said, okay, check off property number two. And at this time, I was traveling all over the Western US for work for my job. And so now, because I was a big bad real estate investor, anytime I would get to a new market, I would look on Zillow and see, okay, what are properties selling for and what are they renting for? And in a lot of these markets, I'm like, holy crap, these things are selling for half the price of what I paid, but are renting for 1.2 times what my single family in Southern California was. So I was like, wait a minute, the numbers make way more sense going out of state. And so I said, okay, California is all fine, but I'm going to focus my attention elsewhere. And so it just happened to be that wherever I was for work, wherever I found that the numbers made sense, I would buy a property. And part of it was because I was turbocharging my savings because I had a bit of a life hack, a cheat code, if you will. And that work was paying for all my living expenses while I was on the road. And I was constantly on the road. Single person made it much easier to be on the road. And I lived with 5 roommates. And so I very much continued this college style lifestyle into my adult career. And so I was just saving a ton of money, dumping it all into real estate as much as I could, as fast as I could, buying much more affordable properties out of state. And so I was able to acquire a fairly sizable portfolio in a fairly short number of years when I look back on it.
You mentioned that you bought in multiple locations. How many different markets did you invest in that early phase?
I was in like 5 or 6 different markets just because I didn't care where it was. I was numbers driven and I wasn't doing a bunch of market research too, Aaron. Like I bought in a property in Ketchikan, Alaska, which most people, unless they happen to have been on an Alaskan cruise, have probably never heard of that town. And so I was like, the numbers make sense here. Who cares about this other stuff? I've since learned to get a little bit more scientific about it in my approach. But in those early days, I was like Wild West. Whatever I could get my hands on that I could afford, I was buying.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I have some parallels in my journey too. We invest in 3 markets. And I remember actually, and I guess we'll get to this part of your story now. I joined the coaching program that you used to teach in. And I had been working on entering a new market. And it was the first time where I joined a program that was specifically geared towards long distance investing, long-term, single family. And it was niched down to exactly what I was trying to do. And I started learning and going through all the courses that you were teaching. And we had a couple calls and I realized how unscientific I had been in the past about deal analysis, market
Right.
analysis, building a team. I was just winging it. And once you learn some of those skills and the ways of looking at it, and you realize how inefficient it can be to have 3 or 4 markets going at once, it makes you think about things a little bit differently. I think there's something to be said for just having bias for action and getting in the game and following the passion that you had for it.
Totally.
And you can clean up and rearrange and trade out of certain markets. You can look at what you have, the pieces on your chessboard, and then rearrange it to fit whatever your strategy is as you refactor it.
Absolutely.
Can you talk about, so you had that first phase before you really got into the kind of coaching, education, community space. Where was the turning point to where you became more, I don't know if academic's the right word, but a little more structured in how you thought about. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. It's funny. I ended up getting some coaching. I got some coaching from someone who's become a very good friend of mine over the years. And he's, dude, like you're running yourself ragged. Go get laser focused on 1, maybe 2 markets and go hit it as hard as you can and watch what'll happen. It'll blow your mind. I was like, I don't know, man. That's like kind of counterintuitive to everything I thought I knew about investing in terms of diversification and spreading out the risk. And because I come from the insurance world, that was always something that was top of mind for me is, okay, if anything happens in market A, I'm in B through F, so not a big deal. But what I've since realized is that you're chasing cats, trying to chase these different property managers for all these various markets. And you can diversify within one particular market. Every market, most markets, not every market, but most markets have sub-markets and sub-neighborhoods and suburbs that you can diversify within. And so the other thing I realized is if you're doing your market research and your market analysis properly, you don't need to diversify. I think you need to diversify if you're investing in the Detroit, Michigans of the country that have a single sector economy where if steel mill or that auto manufacturer closes, the market's going to evaporate. If you're choosing markets that have multiple legs to stand on, that risk is eliminated. And so therefore, I would argue the need to diversify.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think, so there's a couple elements there, right? One is the more markets you're in, the more teams you have to keep track of, the more teams you have to build.
Yes.
And I also think of it this way. If you're planning to hold a property for 20 years, the chances that your property manager and your agents are all going to be in business that entire time without any turnover or any drama is pretty low. So you have some churn to prepare for on your team in addition to the property level stuff. And it can just become a lot to track. And that's something I feel like that can only be learned if you actually set up teams and invest in multiple markets and you realize firsthand, how much maintenance that can be. You had a full-time W-2, I have a full-time W-2, and now I have kids and you're about to have a kid. And you start to recognize the lifestyle cost of all these different things and layers of complexity in a portfolio. And to your
Yes.
point, you can even have one core team and one core market if it's a diverse enough market. And you can either do different strategies or even different areas within the same town and still leverage the same teams and the same systems without having to spread yourself too thin and basically be a part-time manager of managers, which has its own kind of emotional cost.
Yes, absolutely. And it's funny because when I first got started in all these different markets and I was setting up my teams and my system, I was like, oh, yeah, this is sexy. This is cool. This is fun. I'm in all these different markets. And then when I realized when I went deep into a particular market, like the second deal that I did in the same market that I had since focused on, I was like, wait a minute. This is way easier. I don't have to go meet the property manager. I don't have to go cold call agents. I don't have to go learn about this market. And it was just so much easier to build this flywheel of momentum that I was like, oh yeah, forget going into a new market. If you have to, great. If that's something you're into, awesome. But like I found my market and I was like, oh, I'm going to go super deep here. Exactly like you said, when you realize how much time, energy, and effort's involved in setting up a new operation elsewhere, you're like, no way, forget it.
But I would say that I always like to think of, I wouldn't change anything that I've done because I know that's been formative in getting me to where I am now.
Yes.
And the skill of going into a new market and building new teams, even though it's cumbersome and it takes a lot of energy and effort, the fact that you went into 5 different markets and had to do that exercise over and over again, it probably gave you the confidence that if you had to go do it again, or in your case also, you teach other people to do it, the only way you can really master that skill is to do it, right? So if you've only ever built one team in your backyard, it's hard to necessarily map that over to a new market. But if you've entered and built in a few different spots, then that's a skill you can bank on for the rest of your life, no matter how things play out in each of those individual markets.
Absolutely. No, 100%, Aaron. I think only to further that point too, and this is counter to what we were saying previously, is if you're someone that starts out building in multiple markets, you then get the opportunity to go identify which is the best performing market that you have. Versus if you only have invested in a singular market, you have no idea if you could be crushing it 10x in another market because you don't have the experience. So I totally am with you. I wouldn't change anything from a market diversification perspective.
Yeah. And plus, as a coach and as an educator, it gives you the perspective to be able to share with other people. I remember when I joined the program that you used to be in and we had a call, I was all excited about looking at all these different places. And I remember one of the nuggets you gave me was helping me rein in a little bit and deliver that message that you said about focus, right? Hey, what about the places you already are? What about the 2 markets that you already have that have momentum and have, you have people on the ground and you have teams? And it's so easy to get excited, especially when you're new in the game and you're just hooked on the thrill of growing,
Yes.
that you can, easily ignore some of the stuff that's right in front of you. And I feel like that perspective is gained. And that's where some of the value of a coach comes in, is like someone who's been around a few different corners, maybe made some mistakes that could easily be avoided. And all it takes is like one well-timed piece of perspective and advice that can save somebody else a year or two of committing to something that might not make sense for them. So I think that's the other benefit of having that perspective, regardless of how it played out financially in that little period of time. But
Totally. You're going to make me blush, man. I appreciate that.
no, it's always interesting, especially now. I started doing some coaching a couple years after I went through your program. And I always like to think of what are the things that I can tell somebody that will maybe help them avoid some of the stuff that I went through, because there's some mistakes I made. And I think anyone can teach the sequential skills and lay it out. Here's a roadmap. Here you go. You research market, you pull these metrics. Here's the team members you need to hire. Like anyone can create a checklist, but the perspective and experience that you share with other people is individual to that person. And so you never know when you're saying something that feels obvious to you, but it totally blows somebody else's mind, right? And
Yes.
that's the fulfillment side of being a coach and an educator as well as helping people who are maybe a couple steps behind where you are. So
Yep.
I'll always remember it.
Oh,
But
that's awesome, man. That's great.
yeah, it's fun. It's fun to be able to tell you that on the air too. But
Yeah, totally. The live reaction is great.
there you go. But since then, so you were a full-time engineer, then you had a job within the old company where you did education and coaching. And then did you have some time in between or after that as like a full-time investor, or what has your journey been like since then?
Yeah, so actually it was a full-time investor prior to working at that tech company where you
Okay.
and I met. And so it sucks, but so I lost my dad and during that first job I was working at, and I also got married. And I said to the company, I said, look, I just need some time to get my head right. I need to go do a mental reset. Give me 6 months, unpaid. Like, just I'll come back and I'll start working for you. I'll pick up where I left off. And they're like, we can't hold your job for you. I'm sorry. And I was like, but I guess I don't need this job. See ya. And so, because I had spent the last 6, 7 years building up a rental portfolio, and my wife and I decided to go travel internationally. And she was working full time remote. And so, between her job and the portfolio income, we were able to earn dollars in USD, in American dollars, and go spend in colones or pesos or whatever the currency of the country we happened to be in was, and do an arbitrage that way. And so, we were able to have an awesome time traveling around the world. I was doing some consulting too on the side, which was a ton of fun, and we were funding our lifestyle that way. And so I took on a massive project before I left for these travels, and it went totally sideways, like so sideways. And so that's about the time that I ended up going full time with that tech company and helping them do their education program. And then since then, I'm now back in the insurance industry working full time as an engineer. So a lot of ups and downs in between.
No kidding. Okay, a couple threads to pull on. I'm trying to draw which one to go first.
Yeah.
How about the Sideways project with whatever you're willing to share about that experience?
It totally open book because it sucked the whole time. So in hoping to help others avoid the mistakes and the pitfalls that I fell into. So basically, to give you, I'll paint this picture for you and our listeners. I bought a 20,000 square foot mixed use building in a historic part of town. And the town was giving away money to developers for creating additional housing units above commercial storefronts. So think of a typical mixed use building. You have street level commercial space with residential above. Okay, so the building originally had 4 commercial spaces and 4 residential units. My plan was to come in and split one of the residential units in half, create an additional unit. End of story. Simple project. And get some money to do it along the way. What turns out is that as I got a little bit further into this project, turns out that I needed to create additional housing units out of one of the other large commercial spaces. Okay, so add on 5 additional units to the scope of project. Further along I got, turns out that, okay, now in order to avoid having to install an elevator in the building, I needed to convert the ground level, 5 additional units.
Oh
So
gosh.
this project took on a life of its own, needless to say. And so I was able to get the funding for it. I got a construction loan for each progressive phase, not a problem. And I was getting money from the city, not a problem. But during the course of construction, I was in Costa Rica and I get a call from my property manager on a Sunday. And he's like, "You're probably wondering why I'm calling you on a Sunday, huh?" And I go, "Yeah, I am. Maybe you can help me." He goes, "There's been a fire at the building."
Oh
And
god.
1,000 things ran through my head at once. And I was like, well, I'm first off a licensed professional fire protection engineer in California. So this is embarrassing. I'm never going to be able to show my face in the fire protection space again. But secondly, was are people injured? Is anybody hurt? And thankfully, nobody was hurt. It happened over a weekend. But so there was a significant fire department put it out. Okay, so now I got this insurance claim going. All right, fine. Insurance is on it. We'll figure it out. A week later, I get another call from my property manager. He goes, "Michael, you're not going to believe this. There's been another fire in the
Oh
building."
my god.
I'm like, "Yeah, exactly. Oh my God." Like the statistical likelihood of having a fire in your property is already quite low. But having two and a week apart is like Guinness Book of World Records type of thing. So I was like, this is unreal. So short story long, insurance was raking me over the coals. They like weren't cooperating, weren't responding. I had to get a public adjuster involved. All the while, I had to tell my construction crew, hey, don't make any progress. Don't touch any of this stuff, which essentially affected the entire building because it's an active insurance investigation. If they make progress on the build, the insurance can say, we're not paying for that. It's the damage isn't there. So I had to play this waiting game of, okay, stop working here, go focus work on this other part of the building, all the while having a purchase loan to pay for when I bought the building and having a construction loan to pay. So I just like gushing money into this thing. and there's no return and no sight of when it's going to get fixed. Oh, and then to top it all off, this is September 2019. You'll remember what happened in March, April of 2020,
Yeah.
worldwide pandemic. So like I had to go to court with this insurance company, and the court date kept getting delayed because of COVID, and then material prices started skyrocketing. And so I was like, this is insane. So it was about 3 years that I was locked into this insurance battle and just got totally hosed at the end of the day, was not made whole for the losses I incurred. And so a lot of lessons learned from that, a lot of stress, a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of extra gray hair because of it. Now it's finally turned a corner and it is producing, and I've gotten out from the loans and it's in a much better place, as am I mentally, but like it sucked for a long time. It sucked for a long time.
Most people think I'm full of crap when I say that I can operate and grow my portfolio in an average of 20 minutes per day. So instead of asking you to take my word for it, I sat down with my business partner, Nathan, and we ran through our entire 20-minute investor strategy in a free workshop. We go through all the different workflows, software, and tools we use to stay in control of our portfolios so we can focus on what matters most to us. You can watch the entire workshop and download our workflows for free at 20minuteinvestor.com. Again, that's 20minuteinvestor.com. Now back to the show. So the two biggest takeaways I'm taking away are that real estate is risk-free and passive.
That's right. That's right. You just put some money in as a down payment and you're guaranteed to collect rents for the next 30 years. I'm so glad we see eye to eye and you get it.
That is wild, man. I knew about that building, but I did not understand the depths of that story. So a couple questions to cap that one off. How did you make it through that?
Someone asked me that question a few months ago, and the answer that they came back to me with was like, you made it through because you had to. Like, and part of what made this circumstance so unique is that the money that I got from the city was in the form of a forgivable loan, 0% loan that turned into a grant. And I don't make payments on the loan, and it becomes fully forgivable if I own and operate the building for 5 years. So even if I wanted to sell the building and just walk away, I would have had to pay back all this money to the city. So it just wasn't like getting rid of the building wasn't an option. And so thankfully I had spent several years building up this real estate portfolio prior to taking on this project. And so I had equity. And so I basically refinanced to the hilt every single other property that I had equity in and just had to dump money into this thing, which sucks. There's no other way to put it. It's just an ultimate bummer. So that was able to float me through to finishing the project.
Talk about resilience though, right? And I think there's a lot of investors that I look up to. My parents invested in the early 2000s all the way through the recession, and they held through some pretty tough times where they were underwater on certain properties. There's Coach Carson, someone I look up to a lot. Like he had a similar story where he scaled up a ton right into the recession. And I think about folks who earn the resilience by having to weather some of these difficult situations. And they're not just banking on it being rosy good times all the time. And look at you, you're still investing, you're still teaching, you're still coaching, and you're still in it, right? And I think that sometimes that stuff is horrible to go through. I can't even imagine like that one in particular for the duration of how long it lasted.
Yeah.
But you're still doing it, right? And that in and of itself is a statement that it's obviously powerful enough. You believe in it enough as a long-term wealth builder, something that's going to set your family up well, that you're still doing it and you didn't pull the ripcord and do something else. Hopefully that'll be the low point of the interview on the bummer scale.
The bummer scale.
Yeah. But ever since then, you had a chapter where you were doing a lot of coaching. And one of the things too that how I came into your ecosystem was through your guys' podcast. And because I remember I had heard like I'd heard some real estate adjacent podcasts, but I had never heard one that was speaking directly to the single family investor, especially long distance, right? And I've got to imagine, first of all, I remember you specifically as a host. You're a very good interviewer, inquisitive, and you were good at drawing information out of people.
Thank you.
And now I've run a podcast for 16 months, and I realize how valuable of an asset it is to be able to sit on the other end of a microphone and ask people questions and learn all this stuff. So I guess my selfish podcast host question for you is, what kind of impact did that have on you and your trajectory? Do you feel like that was a big kind of turning point into this phase of Michael, or?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because it did a couple of things, like coaching someone and creating educational content for people. Like it forces you to get better, right? Because now it's just not the decisions and the things that you're saying don't just impact yourself, but now they're impacting other people. both positively and negative. So there's responsibility that comes with that. What is it? Great power comes with responsibility, right? So people hearing the things that you're saying and then going and make decisions that are going to impact their lives and their families' lives having to do with money is a big deal. And so it made me get more scientific, to use your word, which I think is a great way to put it. It made me get a lot more intentional. And it reinvigorated this idea of how much I love investing, because I got to celebrate the wins and share those with other people. But then I got to see other people sharing their wins from the content that we created. And so that was really powerful. And to your question specifically, like about interviewing people, 100%. It's funny. We had a guy on the podcast who was a public adjuster. I had another fire in a building that I owned next door to this building, like months after I interviewed him. He was the first person I called, and he and I have become good friends since, and he's a phenomenal public adjuster. And I was like, that wouldn't have happened if not for the podcast. And so I love that you're getting to glean personal insights and benefits from being a host, because I think getting to chat with people that have done things and seen things that you personally haven't been able to do as a podcast host is like one of the biggest benefits to having a podcast out there, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a win for hopefully everyone, right? Especially the interview shows. Like, obviously, I get to sit and have deep conversations with people that I respect and admire, and then bring that to whoever is, what shall I say? I'm grateful to have the audience that I have, and whoever chooses to listen to this, right? They get to benefit from that conversation too.
Yeah.
And yeah, I do think it's all connected, right? And being a coach makes me a better investor, and being an educator and building out courses and trying to like reverse engineer the things that didn't go well in my journey and help other people avoid them. And then also try and double down on the things that did lead to success and highlight them and accent them. And it's a very rewarding phase. And so you're still involved in all that, correct? I believe you now have your own academy, correct?
Yeah. So I went out and built my own when they since shut the doors on their program.
Okay. Tell us about it.
So it's called myFi Academy, My Financial Independence Academy. So MYFI Academy. And it's exactly what you're talking about. It's all of the things that I saw work well from the prior academy that I built, reduced down into the must-haves. We got rid of some of the fluff, and I said, okay, we want to make it accessible and on demand for folks. So we did audio-based only, so they can listen to it on the go. There's visual aids to assist the visual learners, such as myself. And then there's access to all these resources and tools that I wish that I had access to when I first started investing. So it's how to have conversations with property managers, real estate agents, CPAs, attorneys, contractors. What are the questions you should be asking? And what are the answers you should be expecting? And what does that mean? Because what I found over the years, after having done this for a while, is that people can ask the questions. You can give people the questions to ask. Then they go ask the question and they get an answer back. And like, okay, now what do I do? And so, this is the answer you should be expecting to get back. And if you don't, here's what to do there. So really just taking away all of the guesswork for folks. And it's the people that are going from 0 to 1 or 1 to 4 or trying to get involved in some different asset classes that I enjoy working with the most, because they're the hungriest. They don't already have bad habits and they're excited. So the people that are well on their way typically don't need the hand-holding assistance. So it's the newer folks that I really enjoy working with.
I love it. And so is it still focused primarily on real estate? Or I know FI is a pretty broad category. Do you do other stuff outside of real estate as well?
So not now, but in V2 and V3. So my goal is essentially to build out the Udemy of financial independence education. And so I'm going to have courses created by financial advisors talking about stocks and crypto and bonds and all of the different financial instruments that are out there. Is the ultimate genesis of what I'm hoping to build over time.
Got it. And so you mentioned other asset classes. Is that within real estate? So I know you've done multifamily, like you said, you've done mixed use commercial. Do you work with people, or do you have education on how to like make the shift or evolution from single family into other parts of real estate?
Yes, exactly. Because that's so seemingly so organic of the progression that so many folks go through is, okay, I did 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s. Now I want to do 5, 6 plus. And then getting into some commercial stuff. I've got experience and background doing double and triple net lease commercial properties as well. We talk a little bit about that, and I'm happy to help folks go down that path if that's what they're looking for. Because that is a bit more, I'd say quite a bit more passive. If someone's looking for a truly passive investment via direct ownership, triple net is the answer.
Yeah. Not the mixed use project that took 3 years and shaved a bunch of years off your life.
No, you could go that route, and I could tell you some pitfalls to avoid, but I would say no, if you're looking for passive, I wouldn't go down that road.
Yes, I'm very reserved with, call it the P word. I try not to use that in any of our marketing or anything, because I think it can be misleading.
Totally.
Of course, it does exist and it can be achieved to a large extent, but I don't think it's pretty darn hard for something to be truly 100% passive. And the fact that most people's perception of real estate investing in rental properties is that it's passive is a pretty big misconception. And I think it's a rude awakening when people get into it and they assume that's going to be the case.
And especially from day one, like you mentioned, it can be, but there's all these steps on the road to get there for it to be passive. You can't just buy a property and sit on your laurels and think, okay, great, it's going to be passive. And I think the industry has done everybody looking to get into it a disservice by calling it passive income and leading with that as opposed to earned income. You're earning it not from a taxable perspective, it's passive, but you're earning it for sure.
Definitely. There's two more topics I want to hit. We have time. First is, since you work and came from the insurance world, what is your kind of perspective on this? Last couple of years have been pretty rough for property insurance, and the landscape ahead looks pretty unclear as well. And there's not a lot of promising signals that things are going to improve.
Yeah.
What is your overall take, the landscape of the insurance industry right now?
Such a good question, Aaron. It's funny, 3 years ago, people would have laughed at that question because sure, it is one of those things. Who cares? You buy,
you just renew it every year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Not to toot my own horn, but I've always said, guys, we need to be paying attention to insurance. Like, this is something, because I've been through these losses, I've seen what not having great insurance looks like and feels like. It is super important. Now people are waking up because it's an economic driver in the decision-making process. It's no longer is insurance 3% of my budget in terms of my expense ratio. It's 8, 9, 10%, 15%. And so you've got to get it right. And so I agree, the land signals are not great. It does not, like, storms are not getting less severe on the coasts and in the Gulf, and flooding is not becoming less severe in flood zones. Flood maps are changing and becoming more aggressive. So it's just something to be aware of. And I think one of the hard things about insurance in general, and specifically with natural catastrophes, is that we're now seeing things occurring in which 5, 10 years ago, they didn't occur. We have earthquakes in Oklahoma now, right? That wasn't a thing 10, 15 years ago. And so how do we forecast and how do we be mindful of engineering against or being cognizant to where we're investing because of insurance? Challenging for sure. And so personally, I don't invest in flood zones. I'm not comfortable with it. It adds a ton of cost. And again, they're only getting worse. And so I try to invest in markets that just don't have a super high cost of insurance. And that could change over time, right? No one has a crystal ball, but it's something that's definitely on my mind, definitely on my radar, because it's killing deals. Like I'm chatting with insurance brokers and lender colleagues, and they're like, yeah, we can't refinance this property because their insurance went up 120%. They got to bring money to the table because they're underwater on it. Oh my gosh. So, and I was there too. Like I felt this on this particular project that went sideways. What I think a lot of people don't realize about insurance is when you have a claim, it's a demerit. It's a mark of your health record, so to speak. And if you go try to change insurance companies, a lot of carriers won't touch you if you've got this stain on your record. And so I had this horrible fire. I had these insane claims, and then the insurance went through the roof. And so I was like, I got to go somewhere else. And everywhere I try to go said, no, we're not going to touch you until you've had 5 years, 3 to 5 varies based on insurance carrier, 3 to 5 years of clean bill of health. I was like, oh my God. So I'm married to this insurance company that did me so dirty in the claims process that is now charging me an arm and a leg to provide me coverage. This is awful. And so as you're out there looking for insurance, make sure you're with a reputable company. Make sure you're not going with the cheapest option. More expensive doesn't necessarily always mean better, but it's something to be thinking about. And then chat with other investors out there in your market and find out who they're using. Find out who they're using and find out who's had a claim with those companies, because you need an insurance company that's going to be there when you have a claim. That's the whole reason you have them.
Yeah, there's a lot of tactical stuff that people need to probably pay more attention to on the insurance side. Don't just have it's this default assumption that it's going to be there, that you're going to be able to get the coverage that you want at the price you want. There's an active process of shopping. There's a strategy even around when to file claims. Yes. Of course, the areas that you invest in and the types of risk in those areas, those are things to consider instead of just looking at, hey, this house pencils out and it makes $200 a month in cash flow. It's no, what are the other factors at play? Not a good outlook for the city I'm sitting in right now, Houston, which is half of it's in a flood zone. And
right,
our insurance policy on the house I'm sitting in right now went up 44% last year, and there's never been a claim on this house. Some of this stuff's just totally out of your control. Now,
Yes.
shame on us because we brought the bummer scale almost all the way back down to the previous story. So we're going to have to round this out in a positive
On a high
light.
note. Yeah.
Yes. So the last topic I have for you, which hopefully will be positive, you're about to welcome your first kid into your family. Congratulations. You've traveled a lot of road as an investor, as a professional, as a human leading up to this. What do you anticipate, if any, changes you'll have to make to your approach as an investor or just your overall lifestyle as you enter this new chapter?
Man, it's a really great question, Aaron. I think the biggest thing that I'm excited about and looking forward to, and also plan on having a big impact on how I've lived my life, is just when it comes to like risk tolerance and risk mitigation. Swung for the fences and ended up doing a 360 and clocking myself in the back of the head with my own bat on this project that went sideways. And so I'm like, yeah, enough of that. Been there, done that. Didn't work out real well for me. So I can be a lot more strategic and precise with my investing, a lot more intentional with the reason behind my investing. And I've already started implementing this and integrating that into my life the last couple of years, having had so much heartburn from this project. Is like, I'm investing for my family and for my life and for my lifestyle. Whereas previously I was investing for cash flow. I didn't really care. I had the energy, I had the bandwidth. That has all since changed. I'm anticipating a whole lot less bandwidth with a newborn at home. And so I said, if I'm going to be investing, it needs to align with my value and my life vision and be additive as opposed to subtractive. That's really what I'm looking forward to.
I love it. That's a great answer. I'm excited for you. I was joking before we hit record. Last time I spoke to you one-on-one, I didn't even have one kid yet. And now I have three.
Now you have three. I know.
It's only been a little over 3 years. So things can escalate pretty quickly when you start adding children to your family. But it's a beautiful thing. And I applaud all the work you've done leading up to this and the foundation you've laid for your family, and wish you guys all the best as you enter this new chapter.
Thanks so much, Aaron. Appreciate it. I mean, this is the world to me, man.
You bet. It's been such a pleasure to have you on. I know we already talked about your academy a bit, but where can people find you, the academy, if they want to stay in touch or learn more?
Yeah, thanks. So it's myfiacademy.com, like I was saying, myfiacademy.com. You can find me on Twitter or X. I'm at Michael Albaum. On LinkedIn, Michael Albaum. On Instagram, never something I thought I'd say, at myfi Mike. And we host a podcast too, The Remote Investor. So we're on everywhere you find your podcasts.
Loved it. It was a pleasure having you on. We'll have to do it again sometime soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Aaron. Talk to you, man.
Thanks.
Thank you for making it to the end of today's episode. As you may know, podcasts are very difficult to grow organically. If you're getting value from today's episode, I'd deeply appreciate if you can take 30 seconds to leave my show a 5-star rating and review. This will go a long way to helping me reach more listeners just like you. Thank you so much in advance.